Hi, this is Dr. Singhania, and I would like to talk a little bit about the recent updates on the ADD or Attention Deficit Disorder Syndrome, which took place in Berlin in 2011. The talk is going to be in 5 parts. One of the first part is about the new additions to the DSM IV criteria for diagnosis of ADHD. The DSM IV is the standard, it's known as the Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, and it is the way we diagnose ADHD. So I'll be talking about the new additions to that, and I'll be talking about genes, brain imaging, and underlying pathophysiology. I'll also be talking about presentations, comorbidity, and the lifetime condition that it has, and some newer treatments, particularly focusing on the neurofeedback HEG. So there was a lot of deliberation on new additions to be made to the DSM 5. This statistical manual comes out every 10 years, and the next one is going to come out in 2013. There's a lot of deliberation about it. In the DSM 4, the definition suggests that there are significant problems with attention control, impulse control, and activity and arousal levels, especially seen before age of 7 years. Now they're talking about adding disorganization, emotional dysregulation, and cognition. Most people with ADD will have some level of disorganization. They may have difficulty or problems with organizing tasks, keeping track of multiple things. They may have difficulty planning, not just planning the day or week or their life, but even planning their thoughts, planning and organizing what they want to write, for example, in an essay, or what they plan to say in an answer to a question. They also often mismanage time, so either they're too late or they procrastinate and keep putting things off. Emotional dysregulation is a very important part of ADD, and certainly in DSM 5, they are going to include this part. This is when the child is or adult is emotionally labile. Either they're easily frustrated, they get irritated quickly, they may have difficulty controlling their temper, they may be moody, bored, dysphoria. In fact, they are thinking of putting temper dysregulation disorder as a separate entity in the DSM 5. So, what is the difference between these? Let me talk about the cognitive perspective executive functions. For a long time, it was first looked on as a behavioral disorder. Then we realized the learning problems in ADD. And then in the 80s, the attention problems came to mind. Now we talk about executive functions deficit. What does that mean? What is executive function? This is when we can plan, execute, and monitor tasks. This is part of the prefrontal cortex, which helps us to manage our tasks. So we know what kind of things to prioritize, how long we may need to spend on a task, what we may need to do the task, etc. So executive functions are an extremely important part of ADD. And we come to working memory, which is the mental workspace. Now, working memory is also part of executive function, but it's a very important, and that's why we'll discuss it as a separate entity. What is the mental workspace? If I were to say to you, I went to the supermarket and I bought strawberries worth 32 dirhams, raspberries worth 28 dirhams, how much did I spend? You have to hold these two figures in your working memory before you can compute them. Working memory is often affected in children and adults with ADD. So they have difficulty following instructions, especially when there are more than one instruction given. They have problems with mental math. Many things can be affected. And in fact, working memory is more important in how you do in academic environment in the classroom as opposed to your intelligence or IQ tests. The third part is the processing speed, which is again a part of executive functions, but again, it's very important because it's the rate at which one can process incoming and outgoing information. And we know that this is also affected in ADD, and some kids are either slow, it's as if they're on a slow modem. They take time to complete their tasks, either because they get distracted or disorganized or whatever. Now, ADD does affect learning, though it was not looked on as an academic disorder or a learning problem. We know that because of slow processing time, memory retrieval problems, that means retrieving some information from the stores of your memory, this is definitely affected in ADD. Difficulty with attending to details. They're careless and they tend to lose the details. Filtering distractions. Now, distractions could be both internal or external, so both can be affected. Thoughts or external sounds or people. Difficulty with task completion and keeping track track of things, organizing your work, and all this can result in slowing of learning and may result in reading difficulties and math difficulties and actually mimic dyslexia and dyscalculia. Just a little more on executive functions. Like I said, it's a central control process which connects, prioritizes, and integrates functions. It's self-regulation. That's why when parents say, oh, but if he wants to, he can pay attention. If it's a video game or something that he's interested in, he can pay attention. So attention deficit actually is a misnomer. It's more of self-regulation. In an orchestra, you may have the best musicians, you may have the best pianist, the best violinist, but if the conductor isn't good, then you'll have cacophony. You won't have good music. And this is what happens. Now, these are the different parts of the executive functions which are impaired in the ADD syndrome: activation, focus, effort, emotion, memory, action. So executive function is basically managing oneself to prioritize, start, sustain, shift, stop, and integrate cognitive function so that you can accomplish a task. You can do things without moment by moment guidance from others. Often the parents comes and they tell us that, oh, I have to keep telling my child to brush his teeth and go and have a shower and to go and get dressed. And every day is the same story. This is because a child may have executive function deficit. And these executive functions are not completely developed at birth. They start developing at around 2 to 4 years, but they can continue to develop even in the early adulthood. But as the EF development increases, so does the requirement from the environment increases. And so they still may be a mismatch. Thank you. This is the end of the first part of talk.